Hey there, welcome to Crop Talk with Karston. My name is Karston Donovan, and in this week's episode, we're going to look at some pre-harvest reminders, some things to think about prior to harvest, and then also during and after harvest on the crop insurance side to get you ready for the busy harvest season. Quick disclaimer, this is just designed to be a quick informational video and is not going to cover all aspects. So first thing to think about and to talk about is commingled production. You might be asking, what is commingled production? And that's when you're taking production from prior years or from multiple units and commingling that together. So that's something you want to avoid. And how do you avoid that is the thing to think about prior to harvest is, let's say you have crop sitting in a bin from the 2024 crop year that hasn't been brought in yet, and it's going to be sitting in there, and you plan on putting more crop on top of that from the 25 crop year. You're definitely going to want that to be inspected by an adjuster prior to harvest. So the earlier you can get that in, the better, because nobody wants to be waiting for that inspection for them to be able to put more crop on top from the 25 crop year. Nobody wants to slow down the combines. So if you do have crops from the 24 crop year still sitting in a bin and you plan on putting more on top of that, get in contact with your agent and get that inspected prior to harvest. Typically, those adjusters are going to work with you and try and get to you in a timely fashion. You'll typically hear from them within 24 hours, and they're going to work to get to you as soon as possible to not slow you down. And then also, it's possible to commingle production on a unit basis. So even if it's still both of the production is from the 25 crop year, you'll want to keep track of your production per unit. Best to keep it on an optional unit basis. So what I mean by commingling production is you don't want to commingle, the information from one section and the other. You want to have those separate so you're not commingling them together. Next topic is, what do you do if you notice that you're, at a loss or you have damage? And the best practice is to contact your agent as soon as possible once you notice the damage or think you're at a loss. Notify your agent within 72 hours of discovering the crop damage or loss of production, but no later than 15 days after the end of the insurance period, which that could be 15 days after it is harvested. So best to just let them know right away. One thing that people honestly, I think, get confused on because they think more about home and auto insurance is if you turn in a claim and it doesn't, it finds out that there is no payment and it just gets released, that doesn't harm you in any way. It doesn't impact you. So if you think you're at a loss, it's better just to turn it in than to wait on it. So, and then make sure you wait to hear from an adjuster before cutting or destroying a crop that has damage on it. So for example, if you notice that a field has hail damage, notify your agent, get that notice of loss in, and wait to hear from the adjuster before you start cutting it, or let's say you destroy it or whatever it may be. Wait to hear from the adjuster. They'll probably let you just leave some strips so you can keep on harvesting, but you'll want to hear from them prior to doing that. If you have any deferred hail claims, make sure you get those adjusted before harvesting as well. The next question is, how should I keep track of production? Long story short, the best way to keep track of your production is as detailed as possible. It's never going to hurt you to be more detailed than less detailed. It's best to keep track of your production on an optional unit basis. Even if you're signed up for enterprise units, you're not required to, but it is still best practice to keep track of that on an optional unit basis. So per crop, per section, per share. So that way that if you ever go to optional units, you have those detailed records to go back on. And then the question is, what are some approved methods of production? The most common ways of measuring your production would be scale and elevator tickets. Make sure you're writing on those. Like if if one truck has two different sections in it of wheat, make sure you're marking on that ticket that it may go to two different units. And then bin measurement, having a approved adjuster or whatever may be come measure your bins. And then also grain cart scale records are acceptable ways of proving your production. One thing to think about prior to harvest is field grain fire protection. One thing that often goes unlooked is that your multi-pro crop insurance policy is not going to cover any fire unless it's caused by an act of God. So one way to think about it is if it is a fire caused by, a combine starting on fire and then the crop going up in flames because of it, that is not covered under your multi-peril policy, which is something that sometimes people forget about. You may possibly have some grain fire coverage on your hail insurance policy if you purchase hail insurance, but it's only going to be up to that dollar per acre that you set. So if you bought $100 of hail insurance, it's only going to pay up to that $100. So field grain fire coverage is an extremely inexpensive way to protect your crops from a loss, such as combine fires or whatever it may be, for a very inexpensive way. And typically they're going to cost about 25 cents per acre per $100 of coverage. So if you put $200 on, it's going to be 50 cents and so forth. So one scenario to think about is, let's say you think you have a 40 bushel wheat crop out there. If you only have, say, $50 to $100 of hail coverage on there, well, if your crop goes up in flames and it's a total loss, but it's not covered under your multi-peril policy because it's not an act of God, the max it's going to pay is $100. So in the grand scheme of things, that's not very much. And so you might want to consider putting some more coverage for relatively inexpensive with the field grain fire protection. Some other reminders is just to turn in your production as soon as possible after harvest. So that way your agent can help you look and see if you're at any sort of a loss and get that claim payment or claim turned in time. And then also just to think about is, even if you maybe cut over, you know what your approved yield is and you cut over it, you still potentially could be at a loss. Like the 2024 winter wheat was a prime example of this. Let's say maybe you had approved yield of 30 bushels, but you cut 33, you're over that approved yield, but you might still be at a loss because of that price decrease. So, and then also let your agent know about any quality issues that you come across. It may, increase your payment, or you might trigger a payment just because of quality issues. And then one other thing to think about prior to harvest is consider signing up for direct deposit. So that way, if you do have a claim payment, it gets to you a lot faster as opposed to waiting for a check in the mail. That's all we got for you this week. Thanks for joining us. We hope you have a great harvest season, and be on the lookout for next week's episode.